Good morning, everyone. My name is Serge Buy. I will be moderating this discussion on childcare and choice, this virtual discussion, which will take place in the next hour. I am pleased to welcome our panelists, Andrea Annan from the Association of Daycare Operators of Ontario. Andrea, my apologies, Morodzek, with Cardus, Peter John Mitchell from Cardus as well, and Melanie Ross, who operates her own childcare center in North Bay, Ontario. Welcome, everyone. I will ask each and every one of you to introduce yourself. Andrea, please go ahead first. Andrea Annan, please.
Thanks, everyone, for being with us this morning and for including me as part of the panel. I'm Andrea Hannon. I'm the Executive Director of the Association of Daycare Operators, or ADCO. I've been with ADCO for 17 years, and I worked with other childcare organizations for about 10 years before that. And what I've learned from those experiences is that I really believe really strongly that we need to reject one-size-fits-all approaches to childcare. Ontario and Canadian families are incredibly diverse, and our early learning landscape not only needs to reflect that, but also to understand that different families make different choices at different times for different reasons, and the childcare system should really respect and honor that reality.
Thank you, Andrea. And ADCO is funded through the contributions from your members, correct? The annual dues and there's programs that you run, correct?
Correct.
Fantastic. Melanie, to keep it real, you are operating a daycare center in North Bay, Ontario. I'm so pleased to have you within this discussion. Can you provide some information on what you're doing?
Hi, everyone. So I'm from North Bay. I have a childcare center here in North Bay for the past 8 years. I also have a childcare center up in Timmins, Ontario for the past 3.5 years. And then I also have a home agency here in North Bay that runs about 30 to 35 homes. And we've been doing that for the past 4 years. I have been on the board of ADCO for the past 3 years also.
Thank you very much, Melanie. I love Timmins and I love North Bay. Good memories of a long time ago for me there. Peter John Mitchell with Cardus, can you introduce yourself for a few seconds?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Peter John Mitchell, I'm with Cardus. Cardus is a nonpartisan, faith-based think tank and registered charity, and we're dedicated to thinking about flourishing society through independent research and through dialogues like the one we're having today. I've been in the think tank world doing family policy for about the last 15 years. And our particular approach at Cardus to childcare really comes from our definition of childcare, which is the care of a child, no matter who provides that care. So we see diversity in childcare as very important and very important in childcare policy.
Great. Andrea, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, Andrea Morodzek, happy to be with you today. I also work for Cardus, and I have also been working for over 15 years in the think tank sector for Cardus and other think tanks. I've been looking at the childcare issue. Years ago, we costed out the real costs of the Pascal plan for early learning in Ontario specifically. We've gone ahead and convened panels to provide a positive vision for childcare in Ontario that doesn't include nationalized or federally mandated daycare systems. And then most recently, I'm co-author along with Peter John and my colleague Brian Dykema on a paper called Look Before You Leap, the Real Costs of National Daycare. So that might be something we can talk about a little bit later.
Absolutely, Andrea. Thank you very much for this. And Cardus is funded through donations from individuals, correct, as a registered charity?
Correct.
That's correct, yeah.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for confirming this. Now, some technical notes. We have attendees that are in the room with us, and the attendees are able to ask questions through the Q&A button that they will find at the bottom of their screen, in most screens anyway. So at the bottom of your screen, you have a Q&A button. You will be able to type your question, and I, as the moderator, will read it to our panelists and enable them to provide an answer. I'm pleased to see some people from government, from industry, and other interested parties in the list of attendees here. If it is okay, I'm going to start by asking some of my own questions. And the first question is, how would you describe the current childcare climate in Ontario? I'm going to start by you, Andrea Annan.
Well, I guess what I would say is it's fragile and uncertain. So fragile, just because the economy hasn't fully recovered yet from the pandemic lockdowns of last year. And childcare programs, most of them were shut down for 4 months with no revenue. So, you know, a lot of centers are really struggling to make up those losses. And not all parents have gone back to work. Not all parents have gone back to work full time. So it's much harder now for licensed childcare centers to keep their centers full. A lot of centers that used to have long waiting lists now have vacancies. So, you know, they're really struggling to make up the losses that they suffered last year. And, you know, there's also the issue of staffing. It's difficult to find enough staff to run centers at full capacity because adherence to COVID protocols means it takes more staff to look after fewer children. So that's the fragile part. The uncertain part is that you know, there's a lot of talk of this, you know, national $10 a day childcare program. And licensed childcare owner operators who've been around for a while have seen this kind of initiative before. And they know that it's more likely to result in centers closing than it is to lower costs for families or to expand access to licensed care. So a few weeks, we started to see a drop in inquiries from people looking to start new centers. So it's certainly having a chilling effect on the growth of the licensed childcare industry already.
Great, thank you very much. Melanie, we heard from the industry association side of it. I want to hear from you as an operator. How do you feel like in this climate here?
We are all exhausted. We have learned a lot and have been put on, we have to take on a lot right now. We've been dealing with this for the past 18 months where we are put in a place where we are now nurses. We need to know everything about COVID. We need to know every policy. We need to be able to write policies on the dime. Our staff are exhausted. They're cleaning toys. They're cleaning their room 3 times a day. And then you throw us, the schools are closed. So now we have to be teachers. Everyone in the industry is just exhausted. And yeah, it's hard filling spaces up north from where I am. So most of my places are up north. Parents are working from home more often. Spaces are not being filled. We're losing home providers because the cleaning is just too exhausting for them. The policies are just exhausting for them. The uncertainty of the COVID rules are just exhausting for them. We lost over 10 homes in the past 2 months just by burnout. Everyone is just, it's a very fragile industry right now. Childcare work coming in, rooms are closing due to low staff. And so we're not able to give even the spaces that are needed for the children and families. We're not able to give them because our staff are just are gone. They're no longer working in the field.
Thank you. Peter, John, or Andrea, what do you see from your standpoint on the sector?
I think early on in the pandemic, we held some roundtables with operators, but also with groups representing parents and others as well. At that time, certainly we were seeing a lot of uncertainty. And like I think a lot of sort of industries, what we were hearing is the rollout of support was also uneven. And people felt they were treated very differently depending on the sector or even regionally different. So that, I imagine, was quite difficult for operators. I think I'd want to point out that we're still not certain what the future of the workforce looks like just in general. Where are people going to be working? Will people continue to work at home? Will there be kind of split weeks? What's that going to look like? So those significant implications, obviously, for childcare and childcare arrangements as well. And I don't think that's sorted out. I don't think we have a good handle on what the future of kind of work looks like for a good sector of Ontarians.
Great. No, I appreciate that. Andrea Mirodzek, do you have anything to add on that?
Perhaps I'd only add that the announcement via the federal budget of high dollar values funding for an early learning system has not contributed to stabilizing the industry, but rather the opposite. When the federal budget was announced, we began to get emails from providers in BC as well as Newfoundland, elsewhere, that they are thinking of exiting the industry. Because of the nature of the billions of dollars, it's likely going to licensed not-for-profit spaces exclusively. What it does is contribute to a feeling of being unwelcome, was the sense I got from the providers who are not part of licensed not-for-profit. They felt they're unwelcome, they're not wanted, and it's already, as we've heard, a difficult industry to be in for the past 18 months. So under those circumstances, some were considering their exit strategies from the industry, which echoes what we've already heard here today.
Great, thank you. Not a fantastic picture that we're painting at the present time. Now, there is a couple of things that have happened in the last few months. In April, the federal government has announced that it would proceed with a national childcare plan implementing a $10 a day childcare program for Canadians. What are the implications of such a plan for independent license centers? So I'm going to start by you, Melanie. I'd like to hear from you personally. You're seeing this announcement. It's made to sound fantastic. What's your sense? How is this affecting you directly?
Like as an operator, I am trying not to read too much into it, because that just means that either we are closing or we're becoming not-for-profit. When governments are giving out the money, they're giving it to not-for-profits, which we are not. And so I'm trying to keep my head high during this uncertainty, by just trying to think positively, working with our DSAB, because all of our funding is going through our DSABs or our local municipalities, which is also a struggle. And so a lot of our parents have been asking us our opinion, and everyone's talking about how it's too good to be true, and there's going to be many, many implications to this plan.
Great, thank you for that. Andrea, what's your thought on this most announced program that the Prime Minister wants to implement coast to coast to coast?
You're asking me? Yeah, okay.
Andrea Hannon, sorry.
It's okay. So, I guess just echoing what Melanie has said, it's created a tremendous amount of uncertainty in the licensed childcare sector. And so for independent licensed childcare programs, so these are programs, they can be commercial or not for profit, but they're not owned or operated by a municipality, a school board, or one of the large national not-for-profit charity organizations. If we look at the actual language of some of the agreements that were signed or that have been signed since April, it's restricting growth primarily to the public and not-for-profit sectors. So when I look at that, ADCO has seen that a couple of times before. And it doesn't usually end well. Certainly when the Ray government here in Ontario decided that the province's licensed childcare sector should be public or not-for-profit only, and tried to force, small owner-operated centers or small owner-operated programs like Melanie's, for instance, to convert to not-for-profit corporations, all that happened is an awful lot of licensed childcare centers closed. So it meant actually less access to licensed childcare. We saw a similar result under the McGuinty and Wynne governments when they decided that full-day kindergarten should be provided by the provincial government, essentially the public sector, rather than Ontario's licensed childcare centers. So the result in that case was the closure of more than 1,000 licensed childcare centers in the first 5 years of the program's rollout. So, the big loss there was that those centers closed, and they closed rather quickly. And they didn't just, the full day kindergarten came in and it accommodated some of the children age 3.8 to 5 who were originally in the licensed centers. But all of the spaces for children in the other age groups were lost. So even if we look back to 2019, which was about a decade after this full day kindergarten program was rolled out, we still were seeing that the industry had not recovered. Those spaces were not bouncing back. So, a decade later, but before the pandemic, parents were still struggling with higher childcare costs and fewer licensed childcare choices. And the needle, in all the time, the needle hasn't moved on care for children under full day kindergarten age. Is still only licensed spaces for about 20% of those children.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to push you a little bit, Andrea. Surely you're not expecting Rob Ford to follow up in Bob Ray's footsteps and suddenly try to nationalize the daycare sector in Ontario, are you?
Well, I wouldn't expect that, but certainly I think childcare policy is pretty complicated, and what starts out as an idea and what actually happens in the field are two separate things. So, we've seen in recent years that the way Ontario funds licensed childcare, the vast majority of the funding, of provincial funding for licensed childcare, actually is funneled through municipalities. So in other provinces, the provincial government funds licensed childcare centers and they fund parents. In this case, all the funding, there is some money through the childcare tax credit that goes directly to parents, but the bulk of the funding for licensed childcare goes to municipalities. And municipalities have a tremendous amount of discretion over how they fund licensed childcare centers in their communities. And there was a study done by the province a few years back, and that study noted that roughly a third of Ontario's municipalities, and that third of municipalities encompasses about half of Ontario's population, but a third of municipalities actively try and discourage growth in the commercial sector. So, women-owned small businesses like Melanie's are often not funded fairly. They're discriminated against, and the funding goes to public and not-for-profit providers, leaving women entrepreneurs out in the cold.
Thank you, Andrea Hannon. And now I'm going to move to Andrea Mroczek. And you've done for Cardus a study on this, so I'd like to hear from you. What are the implications of such a plan for independent licensed center and financially for the province as well?
Right, I might choose to focus on the financial implications for the provinces. We did do a study look before you leap, the real costs of national daycare. And I'll follow up on Melanie saying that parents are saying it's too good to be true. They would be right in saying that. When we studied the real costs of national daycare, we took the suppositions of advocates for national daycares as our starting point. So looking at 70% of spaces for children under 6 as a starting point, that's typically a percentage of spaces that they hope to attain in the not-for-profit licensed sector. We costed out all the variables that we are included in the cost of national daycare. A big part of that is salaries for staff, and so we carefully considered how rising salaries in that sector will affect the cost of national daycare. The end result was that it costs a lot more than what the federal government is currently promising. So in spite of the fact that there are billions of dollars being poured into daycare, more than has been promised through the multilateral agreements in the past, it's just not enough. So the current amount of funding would guarantee a low quality system. The reason why we say that is that ratios are an indicator of quality. How many children are with one adult? And each province would have to have worse ratios to accommodate children in this system. So the worst ratios in the country right now happen to be legally allowable in the province of Quebec, where they have their own system. And every other province has better ratios of children per adult. Quebec allows 5 infants for one adult, 8 toddlers for one adult. And in every other province, Ontario included, there's slightly better ratios. So it costs more money to have the better ratios. And right now at the current funding level, maybe I'll just conclude with this, what we're looking at is worsening ratios at this budget level, or we need to pour many more billions of dollars into a national system.
And I appreciate that, Andrea. You've alluded to the Quebec system. I'd like to note that tomorrow, 11,000 childcare workers in Quebec are going on their first day of a 10-day strike. They will be doing a rotational strike in Quebec. And as a parent said this morning on TV, she felt she was being held hostage by the system because she no longer has a choice in where she can put her children. So it was quite interesting because this working mother, who supposedly would be helped by a system like this, had it has to take days off work, unpaid days of work, which is difficult for her and put her job in jeopardy because of a large strike like this. Peter John, Andrea Marotzek spoke about the financial implications of this. Can you tell us a little bit more from your point of view, the implication on the sector of such a policy?
Yeah, I think what I would say, at least on the provincial side, is if there are shortfalls and shortcomings, it's really up to the provinces that have to make up those differences. And I think that creates financial pressure and possibly political fallout for that as well. I think one point I'd want to make as well is that the ecosystem of care in Ontario is quite diverse. And so for parents, there's many parents who use care outside of the licensed system, whether they have somebody coming into their home or whether they're relying on a relative or what it might be. And the $10 a day system does nothing for those parents as well. It doesn't recognize the various forms of care that are happening. So I think that has to be part of the discussion as well. In addition to thinking about how does this impact the licensed sector, there's lots of care provisions outside the licensed sector that we need to be thinking about as well.
Thank you, Andrea, and to you, a short answer. How will this plan affect ADCO's members from your standpoint?
Well, I think it will probably force a lot of them to close, and I think we can expect those closures to happen relatively quickly. I think probably more centers will close more centers will close before anything can be created to replace them. So even if we all thought it was okay to destroy the existing ecosystem of care, it would be very difficult to have something put in place before this destruction occurred. So, I mean, licensed childcare centers, particularly those owned and operated by small businesses, they're not going to sit around and wait until wait to see how bad things get. If they have an opportunity to leave the sector, I think a lot of them will, because they really do. They feel unwelcome.
And so I'm in the let's keep it real section. I want to bring it back to Melanie. Melanie, you've invested, I assume, your heart, your guts, and your sweat in building your centers. And my assumption is, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but my assumption is you haven't put aside millions of dollars that you took from the parents so you can build a cozy retirement in warmer climates as a result of you running those childcare centers. How do you see the government coming and taking away your business? How will this impact you personally?
It will be devastating. And I also think, and I'll feel horrible for everyone in our community. So up north, most of our childcare centers are for-profit. Up in Timmins, I think there's only 2 for not-for-profits out of 11 centers. So I would feel horrible. I will be out of a job. And then also North Bay will be out of a home agency. And I think it'll be crippling to the whole sector as a whole, because all of these for-profits will close, and then you will only have 1 or 2 not-for-profits running the entire sector in all of the province. And down south in Toronto, you would have a lot more not-for-profits, but up here in the north, we only have 1 or 2 in each of our towns. And so they would be running the entire sector in the city, which means there's no choice for parents. There's 0, because there's just only 1 or 2 where we are. And so it will be a devastating time for all parents and for all of us working women.
Now, Melanie, what do you say to the people who say, but the future is bright for you, Melanie, you can just join the union that will be running the next childcare center that the government will be creating in Timmins and North Bay? Is that an appealing idea for you today?
No. So the reason why we opened the childcare center here in North Bay, and then we bought one in Timmins, was to help better the sector, to give more choice to parents, to adopt a system or build a childcare center that follows parent-led decisions, parent-led choices, times. We're open the longest here in North Bay. We closed the latest in North Bay to accommodate our parents that are working shift work, because we are able to do that. We made this model around our families in our cities that we currently are in. And so I'm not willing to go to a system that is mandated by a minister or mandated by a big picture, big box type idea, because that's not our parents' want, and that's not what they're looking for.
So you mean your dream is not to join the picket lines in Quebec tomorrow? I understand that clearly. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Much appreciated. We're almost running to the half-an-hour mark. I must be doing a great job because I don't see any questions in the Q&A section. But I'm going to remind people, including those that have joined late, that there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You're welcome to ask questions. This is a good time for anybody from the government, from the Legislative Assembly, even from the sector, to ask questions directly, and I'll be glad to relay those questions. Now, you've all talked about choice, Andrea, Melanie. Melanie, you alluded to the choice being, as an example, opening later than others. Give me a sense of the innovation, the diversity, the capacity to be flexible that the private sector offers, whether or not they're for-profit or not for-profit, but versus the publicly funded systems. Give me a sense of that flexibility. And maybe Andrea first, and then Melanie after, and then I'll go back to Peter John maybe after this. Andrea Annan, sorry.
Thank you. Thanks. Well, I guess one of the things I would say is that when I look at the ADCO membership, and ADCO members, there are a lot of woman-owned small businesses like Melanie's. There are also a number of standalone not-for-profits. And these ones are typically single-site operations, maybe that were created by a church. So a church or a temple, synagogue, like that. So they're not affiliated with any big box kind of entity. And I guess what I'd say is, you know, that all of the entrepreneurs I've ever met through ADCO, they go into creating their centers because one of two things: either they've worked in the childcare sector for a while and they've been pretty dissatisfied with what they've seen on offer from their previous employers. And so they think, wow, you know what? I'd like to open my own childcare center because I know I can do it so much better. There's also a segment of the ADCO members who are parents, and maybe they have experience in other careers, and they had children, and they went to find childcare and realized, wow, there is nothing out there that I am comfortable leaving my child in all day. I'm going to have to create the center that I want. So they bring their expertise from other career fields, and they hire supervisors and they hire staff, and they get the specialized knowledge that they need. And so that's really the heart of the innovation. The innovation is looking around and seeing, oh, wow, I could do this so much better, and then they do. Or, wow, I need to create the center that's required for my own child because it just does not exist. And I think without those entrepreneurs, Ontario's childcare landscape would be pretty much lowest common denominator care.
Melanie, you know, I've heard stories about centers accommodating families where their children were refused by other centers. I've heard centers that worked with independent childcare centers that worked with parents of autistic children to find solutions for them in their centers. I've heard the flexibility that your centers offer. Can you give me some examples of that you think would be lost in a government mandated program?
Yeah, so when we opened, I have a great example. When we opened our childcare center here in North Bay 8 years ago in November, the biggest struggle were our flex care, our families at the hospital. So they weren't able to bring in doctors or nurses from outside of North Bay because they weren't able to find childcare for them. A lot of people that were from North Bay have family here, and that's how they were getting childcare, was with their own family members. So when we opened up, we made an agreement with our hospital that we would be offering flex care schedules, which we will allow parents to come and go when they need it. They tell us the dates, they could add dates, they could take away dates whenever they need. So we started that 8 years ago. Because we started it 3 or 4 years later, everyone else in our area has started it also, because they've seen the need is there. And so because I was able to shape the program around these families and this need, we were able to operate for many years without any funding from anyone. And so slowly as we started and built, we've gotten some funding from our municipalities, but it took a long time. And so I think families around our area, there's another thing is our families are all into healthy and clean eating now. So now we bring in all of our food from local farms and from local gardens and local individuals to help businesses around us. Because that's what our parents are wanting right now. That's what they're needing. We're able to do those things because I listen to our families. But if we're going into this big one set plan, we won't be able to have those choices. We won't be able to be that flexible. We're not able to listen to our parents and do what they're asking, and really listening to the economy and what they need.
Great, thank you. Andrea Morozek, do you believe a national strategy for childcare is going to work, and especially for Ontarians?
No, and I don't think at the same time that those in favor of it set out to curtail choice or make it harder for parents. However, I think they're failing to examine a set of pretty predictable unintended consequences from the type of funding and how it's delivered. The other thing I'd add is that across the province of Ontario, it varies by municipality, as people on this panel would know better than me, but the level of government intrusion and intervention into the section can vary substantially municipality by municipality. And so we've been told a lot by activists for national daycare that there's a complete market failure on the childcare issue. Well, clearly in Melanie's area, there's no market failure, and she's responded to the needs of parents. In other areas, I'd say the discussion needs to be around whether it's a market failure or a government failure due to the high levels of intervention into the sector, the choice to funnel subsidies only into one type of care, for example, in the municipality of Toronto. So there's a lot of unintended consequences that come about. If I could cite one more, on the salary level. So it sounds really nice to boost the salaries of early childhood educators, but that has a ripple effect into the other areas that compete with early childhood educators. So once ECE salaries go up, then we can expect kindergarten teacher salaries to go up, and everybody else on the scale will follow suit. In effect, to answer your question specifically to Ontario, the costs for Ontario will not be limited to childcare alone. It will ripple into other areas of the education system as they struggle to keep staff members in their, if they were to sign on to a strict national daycare plan, they will find that they have to find more money in other sectors of the education system as well, which is something I think people don't think about, these unintended consequences to one government action.
Absolutely. Peter John, would you like to add to this?
Yeah, as we've been having conversations with a variety of folks about the possibilities of what could be the unintended consequences in Ontario and across the country of rapidly decreasing the cost of care to parents in one part of the sector. Sometimes we get skeptical looks about that. They say, well,
Let me turn on my video.
Aren't there new spaces being created through this $10 a day plan and that kind of thing? And two sort of responses is we kind of point to Quebec in the example there, that when they rapidly decreased the cost of care to parents by bringing in their plan, the independent care sector collapsed, it crumbled. And it had to be wooed back through tax credits. And still in that system today, you have highly subsidized care centers, but you also have those that aren't, and parents have to receive some sort of tax credit to afford that kind of care. So we have long waiting lists for the highly subsidized care today in Quebec, as I did 20 years ago. So that's, I think, something to think about. I think somewhere in the debate that we've had over the last number of weeks on childcare, when it's come up, it's been said that this plan creates a lot of spaces. And I went through the national agreements, agreement by agreement, and where I could see that space has been promised, I counted those up and looked at them. So by 2028, the portion of new spaces, if those targets are reached, will accommodate an additional 4% of kids under the age of 6. That's not a lot of spaces. That's not a lot of space creation. So I think there's like a little bit of a myth that this plan is really about that. I think the federal budget was clear. It was about trying to reduce the cost. And there's a number of ways to address the affordability issue. Affordability is a real issue, but there are more than one policy lever that could be pulled to address that.
And Peter John, I want to push on one of the things you said. So you said that it would create an additional 4% of spaces. Does that take into account the closures that we're hearing from Melanie and Andrea?
No, that is only taking into account the spaces that have been promised under the agreements that we know of. So it doesn't account for what could happen. That's right.
So we have rainbows and unicorns that are promised on one side, and we have gloom and doom on the other side. So somewhere there needs to be a careful, sober second thought on this before it's implemented in a province like Ontario, where we've heard of the challenges in the childcare program. Great question from one of our attendees, Juliet Purnell. One of the arguments for universal childcare is that private centers don't provide quality care. And she's asked a follow-up question, which is, who determines quality care, and are the parents who utilize this service surveyed on their opinion of quality? So I'm going to start by you, Andrea. What is this quality debate on this? Provide us, please, some ideas of what the answer is to this. Andrea Annan. Yes, you're not magically knowing that when I look at your picture that I'm talking to you. My apologies.
Well, I guess this I always think of this commercial versus not-for-profit versus public quality debate is a little bit strange, given that here in Ontario and in most other provinces, all licensed childcare centers have to, in each province, all licensed childcare centers have to follow the same rules. So they're, licensed by the same ministry. They have to follow the same rules and regulations. They're subject to the same kinds of inspections. So and in Ontario, that was the case, that's been the case not just under the Child Care and Early Years Act, that was the case under the Day Nurseries Act, which prevailed for 40 plus years before. So, how can there be an appreciable quality difference between the two sectors if they've all been regulated the same way and they all have to follow the same rules for more than 50 years? So I always think that debate is kind of, it doesn't make any sense if we all have to follow the same rules. I would say the only place that's exempt from those rules is the full-day kindergarten program. The government-run full-day kindergarten program is actually exempt from the Child Care and Early Years Act. It doesn't have to follow any of the rules or regulations that are laid out for licensed child care centers who would serve children of the same age, 3.8 to 5 years. So, this not-for-profit versus private quality debate, it's nonsense.
Andrea Marotzek, Peter John, would you like to comment on this a little bit as well? The quality debate, clearly it's been talked about in a few media pieces. Can you add to this? Andrea Marotzek?
Yeah, sure. I will jump in. I think that I'll talk a little bit about ratios again, and touch on what Andrea was speaking about with regards to kindergarten in Ontario and the political pressures that will face Ontario should they accept the billions of dollars from the federal government on flexible terms. So ratios are one indicator of quality. As I said earlier, it's widely accepted both amongst people who love the Quebec program and those who don't, that their ratios are poor quality. So the 5 infant to 1 staff member example. The political pressure that will come to pass if Ontario parents believe they should have access to $10 a day daycare and there aren't enough spaces, and it is difficult and costly to build those extra spaces, the political pressure will exist to change the current ratios to include more children per adult, and that decreases the quality for little people. So this is exactly what has happened in Quebec when they had their provincial system. Again, they have the worst ratios in the country. And then in Ontario's kindergarten program, you see that they leave the ratios entirely aside. And so children of the same age in the kindergarten program are subject to no ratios, where children in a daycare environment are subject to better ratios. And I would point to one international example. Sweden is often cited as a place to look to for their daycare system. and they relinquished all ratios. They have no ratios on the books right now. So I think that, again, unintended consequences exist of trying to create a system of licensed spaces, which in the short to medium term, which could extend past 20 years, as we see in Quebec, is going to fail to provide those spaces, but parents will still believe they should have access to them. And what are our leaders going to do at that time? More likely than stick to high quality ratios, they will open the floodgates and allow more kids in. And we know that that has detrimental effects on child outcomes. Again, pointing to Quebec, they have a lot of research there suggesting that children are not doing well in the provincial daycare system there.
Thank you, Andrea. Peter John, would you like to add a short response to this as well?
Yeah, the part of the question that sort of piqued my interest was the role of parents in understanding quality. And I've certainly sat in a number of meetings talking about quality, and there really is no sort of body that represents parents, right? We see industry associations and others that all rightly have a voice at the table, but it's harder to kind of get that parent voice. But I was intrigued by that part of the question, and made me think earlier our discussion when Melanie was talking about how she responded and made adjustments in her own program for parents, and even just the type of food and that kind of thing. And I thought that was kind of a really interesting reflection there on how parents can be involved in sort of understanding and participating in what quality actually is.
Great, thank you. Melanie, thank you for being back after a couple of technical issues. The quality, some people indicate that quality can only be found in the public paradise. Can you tell us a little bit more about your situation and how you believe that you're offering quality childcare? Melanie, you're frozen, so I think I'm gonna move unless we're able to get you, which is too bad. Melanie, can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm good. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, so quality I find is within the own centers. So sometimes you find unquality programs in not-for-profit, and sometimes you find not quality in for-profit. And I think it's unfair for the not-for-profit sector to be put in this umbrella that we don't provide quality care. I also find that it's up to the parents to find and to source out the quality care.
We are having technical issues with Melanie, Melanie's connection. I'm going to move to another question, if that's okay. If I were a senior public servant in Ontario, looking at $30 billion that the federal government really wants to give to all the provinces, including a good chunk to Ontario, I have Ontarians that are saying, please, give me more spaces, give me better access to and cheaper access to childcare, and significant challenges in terms of getting employees as well. And a lot of employers saying, why can't we get mothers a better access to childcare so we can enable them to get to work? Tell me in a short amount of time, as much as you can do it on a short basis, give me a sense of what policy options should I, as a public servant, if I were a public servant, which I'm not, should look at for Ontarians with this national childcare program. Andrea Hannon, please go first.
Yeah, well, I think, the first thing is to look at empowering parents and to also recognize what the realities of Ontario's licensed childcare sector are right now. So, right now, less than 30% of Ontarians use licensed childcare. The other 70% have made other types of arrangements. And there's nothing wrong with most of those other types of arrangements. But, parents know best what's best for their children and what's going to work best for their individual circumstances. So, some parents prefer to have a relative home with the children, or a parent home with the children part of the time. Some families prefer to use the lady down the street, an informal home-based care provider. There are a lot of different permutations within families. And I think the most important thing to do is to fund families. So you fund families and then allow families or empower families to make the choices that are going to work best for them. So really meeting families where they are, empowering them to make their choices, empowering women if it's a lone parent family and the woman is there's one parent and they're the sole breadwinner. That's even more important, to empower the family, empower the parent to make the choices that he or she feels are best. And recognize too that for most families, they're not using just one childcare option. They're usually combining 2 or 3 different types of childcare in the average month, in the average week, and their childcare choices change over time. So expecting them to adjust their lifestyle to fit a specific system is not realistic. Empower the family, and if they want to use licensed childcare, great. If they want to use licensed childcare some of the time, fine. Maybe they're going to use the lady down the street for the rest of the time. Maybe grandma's coming over. We don't know, and we shouldn't try and shape how families do things based on our own, as a government, for instance, based on what we think is going to be best. We really need to meet families where they are.
Great. Thank you, Andrea. I'm going to go to Andrea Mroczek with policy options for public servants or members of the provincial parliament, as we have some present. MPP Christina Mitas will be asking the next question after this. So Andrea, please go ahead. Andrea Mroczek, please, your policy options.
So we have the multilateral agreements, the provinces with the federal government that exist and provide millions, if not billions of dollars to childcare spaces across Canada right now. That funding is not going to stop flowing. You have also, of course, the Canada Child Benefit, the CCB, that provides some money to parents. The reason why I think money to parents is more effective is because it allows them to then disperse their choice of childcare into a number of different options, to just emphasize what Andrea Hannon just said. So instead of putting money into a space that draws everybody toward that space, if you give the money to parents and families, they're going to choose from a broader range of options available to them in their family and their communities and centers and everything else. And we won't be stuck with as much of a quagmire drawing people into one form of care. I think Ontario needs to be specifically very careful understanding the diversity of care options available right now and what that will look like on a provincial level if we distort or eradicate part of what we call the existing ecosystem of care. So, the money to parents thing, it's something that we frequently hear doesn't create a system, but that's the point. We value parents' contributions. We value the power of parents in the lives of their children, and we value them being able to have money in their pocket to be able to decide what works for their family, which we've already heard can change from child to child and moment to moment in the lives of any family. So, that's kind of where we're at with the money that is flowing and making sure that parents have authority and power and that they maintain that vis-a-vis funding spaces versus families.
Appreciate that. Peter John, would you like to add something to this, please?
Yeah, I think the province should negotiate for maximum flexibility with what it can do with those funds. And as we've seen already this morning, the childcare ecosystem looks different in Melanie's part of the province than it does in Toronto. And how we fund childcare, how we think about this needs to reflect those diversity as well. Also, in addition to what my colleague Andrea said, Ontario does have a refundable tax credit. I think that's a tax credit that could be even improved upon. Certainly it's geared to income, and I think some of those cutoff points, whatever, could be adjusted to help even more lower income Ontarians as well. So I think there's lots of policy options out there that can address things like affordability.
Great, thank you. Andrea Hannon, I saw your finger going up, which means you wanted to say something else.
Yeah, just that sometimes people think that there's this idea floating around that by funding families, you're not actually creating new spaces. And you had mentioned this just in passing, and I'm not sure everybody caught it, Serge, but in the Quebec system, when they've had tremendous pressure with long waiting lists, not enough spaces being created, and so on, they have actually moved for periods of time to funding families directly as a way of creating new spaces. So they did this in 2009, I believe, under Jean Charest, and they've done this periodically. And so, obviously, it does create new spaces when you fund families.
Great. Yeah, and it wasn't me, it was Peter John, but I understand the confusion. We look similar, right, Peter? John.
Sorry about that.
I'm going to go through to, we've got 5 minutes left, and I do want to address a question from MPP Christina Midas, because I think she's asked a very good question. Is there a plan to get the facts that are being presented on this call out to the mainstream? Is there a plan basically to get your side of the story out to the mainstream? And I'm going to answer that, Madam Mitas, first. We don't expect the Toronto Star to carry that side of the story, but the good news is that there are other journalists that may be interested in carrying the story. I think, without putting anyone on the spot, there is one on this attending this webinar right now. I would also indicate that ADCO is definitely trying to expand the message to various MPPs throughout the whole spectrum in the Ontario Legislative Assembly. And it is pushing a social media campaign, which ADCO would love you to be able to support by spreading the message, Madam Mitas, because you certainly have probably more people following you than a lot of other people. So we would appreciate definitely to see ADCO moving on that. So happy to answer that question. 4 minutes left, and I don't like extending meetings because people have things to do, and when we promised we would stop, we will stop. Andrea, last words from you, 30 seconds. How do we fix this on this? How do we fix this? How do we get things moving? You're waiting for appointments with government officials. You're going to meet with the ADM next week. You've got a number of meetings that are being booked. You may not have them on your schedule yet, but they're being booked. How do you fix this? You want a government to be able to listen? Andrea Hannon.
Yes, well, absolutely. I think it's important to look at this from a variety of perspectives, and particularly from the parents' perspective. Very important to meet families where they are and to look at the system that currently exists and look at how we can build on that rather than having to replace it with something else.
Great. Melanie, if you had one thing to say to parents, and I see someone putting a message out saying it's about empowering families, what would you say to parents, but also to government officials as they're considering their next options?
I think everyone needs to look at it as a whole package and not just what at the pretty number at the end saying it's only going to cost the parent $10 a day. I think everyone needs to look at a whole picture, the whole system, the whole package, and how we could support the entire province, and not just that pretty number of $10 a day.
Great. Andrea Morotek, last few comments on this.
Well, maybe I'll just take it personal for 1 second. I can hear my 2-year-old upstairs. I think there's a rich and beautiful tapestry of care that happens outside of the government provision, and that it ought not be denigrated or judged as poor or inferior quality. Again, parents need to be empowered, and whether they're choosing a public licensed center or something else, it's always in their hands to discern whether it is quality for them and what works for them. And so I would just want to speak for those families. I think 47% in Ontario have parental care only. That's a pretty high percentage, almost 1 in 2 families caring for their children at home. So it's beautiful care, it's good quality care, and it's not something to judge or denigrate or worry about. We need parents to be choosing.
Andrea Morotek, the government would turn around and say, but we have no plans to stop parents from going to independent licensed childcare centers. We're just going to create a $10 a day public center. So what do you say to that, Andrea Morotek?
Well, it's the subject of this entire call has been about how various people will get out of the industry courtesy of the government intervention in the one sector, in the one part of the childcare sector. So I think listening to the whole call from beginning to end, this presentation gives that robust sense that people will leave the industry and choices will be, I mean, my personal choices just won't be funded under the federal government plan. The choices I've made that I believe to be the highest quality for my family right now. So we're ignored. Other people will leave, and then other people will be given preferential treatment, which is why it's discriminatory at the root.
Peter John, 20 seconds, 30 seconds.
Yeah, I mean, just add to what Andrew said, this is a diverse ecosystem of care, and we want policies that recognize that and recognize all families. I'd say that childcare is part of a larger family policy issue. So to those who are legislators listening, this is just one issue that fits into other pieces of information. And I'd also like people to check out cardis.ca, which is our website. We have plenty of information there as well.
Great. And please do follow ADCO on Twitter, on Facebook, as it is trying to amplify its message to parents, to government officials, and to governmental officials, elected, non-elected. Thank you very much for joining us today. Thank you for all the attendees, and let's continue to amplify the message. Thank you. Have a wonderful rest of the day.
Thank you.
Without thunderstorms for Melanie.
That's okay.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.